Pledges can be called many different things by different organizations, but Denari defines a pledge as a commitment to make a donation for a period of time in a variety of frequencies. Commitments can be made by donors for specific fundraising efforts and tracked by fund code. If you are a child sponsorship organization, the pledge is the link between the donor and the sponsored person. The pledge is the sponsorship. Payments on pledges can be made by credit card, electronic fund transfer, or check. Denari uses the pledge record to instigate automatic credit card and EFT transactions as well. Denari also offers several options for tracking pledges and notifying donors of their pledge status. Pledges can be set by the donor through your online community page, or you can set them up internally. Let's start by setting up a pledge internally. The pledge belongs to the donor. So to create a new pledge, we can begin by finding the donor's name record. Click the Names link in the sidebar menu, Name List Management, and then I'll just select a name record here. Next, in the navigation section here, we'll choose Pledges. This page shows a list of open pledges for this donor. To create a new one, you can click the Add New button. I'm just going to click the pledge that's already here. The first field you see at the top, below the donor information, is the creation date. This is simply the date that you or the donor sets up the pledge, and you'll be able to filter on that later if needed. Below is the close checkbox. Once this pledge is fulfilled, simply check this box and hit Save. The pledge will no longer show up as an option in gift entry, and if it is a credit card or EFT pledge, it will stop running those transactions. The pledge will not be deleted, and you will be able to see it later and even report on it if needed. Denari also will record the date that the pledge was closed. The description field can be used for whatever information you would like. Its great value, however, is in gift entry. The gift record has a drop-down field showing all open pledges for a specific donor. That field shows this description field's contents. If the donor has more than one pledge, the description field in that drop-down field can show which pledge to apply the donation. It helps you distinguish between the pledges, so you will want to make your description distinctive. If you're a sponsorship organization, it is usually helpful to put the sponsored name in the description field for that reason. The fund and appealment code fields are required fields. The fund code tells us what money that the pledge generates will be used for. The appeal code tells us what fundraising function generated this pledge. If you have any questions about the use of these codes, please see the separate videos on these topics. The payment amount field is just that. It is the amount that the donor will pay each pay period. Enter a number here with no dollar sign and no zero decimals. So if the payment amount is $25, we can just put 25 in that field. Across from that is the frequency. You can see in the drop-down that there are a variety of options, and we'll select monthly. The start date is a required field. It's the date that the pledge will begin. It is also the anniversary date. For example, if the pledge is a monthly pledge for $25 starting on June 1, Denari knows that $25 is due on that date. On July 1, Denari knows that another $25 is due, etc. Denari can track who is behind in their pledge payments based on the amount due, which is based on the start date. We'll talk more about tracking later. The stop date is optional, but using it or not using it has consequences, and you should know about those. If you use a stop date, Denari knows exactly how many payments to expect. If we set the stop date at 12 months from the start date, Then in our example, Denari can calculate the $25 payment times 12 and know that the total amount pledged is $300. In the upper left corner of the page in this table, you'll see that the total pledged will show $300. The first field there is the total pledged, and this example then will show us whatever that calculation is. We can now run reports that show the total pledged and quickly add up all the pledges to know exactly how much has been pledged in total. And that's very handy for budgeting. The downside to using a stop date is that the pledge stops. If the donor wants to continue on with their pledge, someone has to either set up a new pledge or extend the stop date for this pledge, and this requires more management effort. The advantage of not using a stop date is that the pledge never stops. This is, of course, great for EFT or credit card pledges. They'll just go on until the donor tells you to stop. The disadvantage of not using a stop date is that Denari doesn't know how many payments to expect, so it can't calculate an accurate total pledged amount. So what it does instead is use the number of payments from the start date. In our example of the $25 pledge starting on June 1, it will show the total pledged as $25. On July 1, the total pledged will be $50, etc. This makes calculating the grand total of all pledges more difficult. You now have to total up the payment amount of your monthly pledges, annual pledges, etc., and put it all together to arrive at a total. One other consideration: Denari also calculates the balance or outstanding field. That is the difference between the total pledged and the paid so far or given. If no stop date is used and Denari can't calculate the total of the pledge, then the outstanding field becomes irrelevant as well. There are other ways to determine if someone is behind in their pledge, however, so this may not be too big a problem. Ultimately, you will need to decide whether to use a stop date or not based on the pros and cons in your situation. The next two fields relate to the pledge acknowledgement. It is a statement format that Denari considers a one-time statement that is normally sent to the donor as confirmation of their pledge. The acknowledgement by default is an 8.5 by 11 page with the bottom 1/3 showing the pledge information and the top 2/3 showing a letter that you create. You can do that under the Gifts tab and then Letters. To use this, you will check the Q for Acknowledgement checkbox and select the letter body that will be plugged into the top of the statement. When you run them, Denari will create the statements and then uncheck the box so that when you set up new pledges, you won't repeat them. We'll cover this in more detail in a separate video also. There is both a printed and emailed version if you have purchased the e-correspondence module. The Notes field can be used for anything you want related to the pledge. If you are a sponsorship organization, you will see the sponsored name field below. Click the search icon next to the field and select the person or child to be sponsored. When you complete the rest of the pledge form and hit Save, Denari will change the status of the sponsorship record to Sponsored. When gifts are made and linked to this pledge, the sponsorship is updated. As mentioned earlier, the sponsorship is the pledge. The pledge is the link between the donor and the sponsored person. You also have a second field called Correspondence Contact. This is optional but can be used to link a second name record to the sponsorship. This might be someone who wants to also get information about the sponsorship from time to time. When you output pledge data from Pledge Segmenter, the correspondence contact address info will be included there. Select that person from your name list by clicking the search icon. If you are a sponsorship user, you will also see the photo card queue checkbox in this section. Denari can produce a photo card for sponsored name records in an HTML format. It's usually a photo with some information about the person being sponsored. There are two ways to generate those. One, you can go to the sponsored name record and check the Q photo card checkbox there. When you run photo cards, Denari will produce a photo card for those name records that you've checked. This field here, however, relates to the donor. If you check the box here, when you run photo cards, you will get cards for any or all of the people being sponsored by this donor. To clarify, this field relates to the donor, while the one found in the sponsored name record relates to the sponsored name, but they both produce photo cards for sponsored name records. If this pledge is to be paid by check, you can stop here and hit the Save button at the top of the page. At this point, Denari will create a pledge schedule. When needed, Denari will update the schedule as it moves along. The schedule can be edited by clicking the Schedule button in the Quick Actions sidebar. By default, this page shows all payments in the future and filters out those in the past. You can change that filter by clicking the Quick Filter checkbox. If a donor calls to tell you that they can't make the August payment, for example, you can open the schedule and change the payment amount for that month to 0. You could add a new payment to the end of the pledge to make up for the missing August payment as well. By zeroing out the August payments, the pledge stats won't show that the donor is behind if you're sending out pledge statements. Denari calculates things like paid so far, ahead behind, due so far, days behind, average paid, and other things that Denari calls stats. Calculating those is a time-consuming process that slows down the Denari servers. When you save the pledge, Denari will calculate them as of that moment, but as time goes on, the stats will only be updated during the night. Occasionally, you may want to update the stats for a specific pledge rather than waiting for the nightly routine. You can do that by hitting the Stats button in the sidebar. That will run the process for this pledge and update all of the stats. There are some stats shown on this main page here at the top, but you can see more information about this pledge by clicking the View Full Stats link to the right of the table. There's one field here in the table that requires some explanation. That is the Due As Of field. This can be a little confusing, but the key to this is the As Of part. It shows what should have been paid to this date. So if this is a $25 per month pledge and we are 3 months into the pledge, then the Due As Of field will show $75 regardless of what has been paid. In other words, it's not showing a balance of what is due. The Ahead Behind field shows the difference between what should have been paid, the Due As Of field, and the Paid So Far or Given field. It shows if they are ahead or behind in their pledge as of this date. If the pledge is behind, it will show a number surrounded by parentheses indicating that it is a negative number. Some pledges can be paid by credit card or EFT, and Denari uses the pledge record as the way to instigate and manage the process. Before setting up a credit card or EFT information, you will need to fill in the pledge information that we've covered so far and then hit Save. That will cause the credit card or EFT links to appear below. Setting up a credit card is very similar to an EFT with a few differences, so we'll start with the credit card. First, you'll need to check the credit card checkbox. This tells Denari that this is a credit card pledge. Next, be sure that the status field is set to live. This simply means that it's ready to go. You can change the status to any of the others when needed, and Denari will use this field as well. We'll cover that in more detail in the credit card and EFT video. But as an example, you could put a credit card pledge on hold, and that will prevent Denari from running that pledge on its next scheduled run. Next, you will add the credit card information by clicking the Add Edit link. We don't have that link here because the credit card module isn't live in this demo company. However, you will see the link here just to the right. It is important to note here that when you click that link, a window will open that is a front stream window. When you enter the credit card info and click Save at the bottom, that information goes directly to front stream. It is not stored by Denari or by you. The reason for that is that FrontStream is PCI compliant, which simply means that they meet all the standards for security set by the credit card industry and are audited on a regular basis to be sure they maintain the security standards. Furthermore, that is the only time that the credit card information passes over the internet. FrontStream compiles the credit card data on their end and gives it a code called a PNREF. That code is sent back to Denari. When the credit card transaction is initiated by Denari from the pledge, Denari only sends the code from that point forward. FrontStream then matches the code with the credit card record there and uses that to process the transaction. This method does provide great security for your donor's credit card and EFT information. However, it does present a problem. Because FrontStream stores the credit card and EFT info as a single unit or record over there, that means that the expiration and credit card number are bundled together into one record and stored at FrontStream. So updating a credit card when the expiration date is passed is impossible. You can't really edit a credit card or EFT record. When you need to update a credit card record, you will need to set up a new credit card record in the pledge by clicking the Add Edit link and entering the credit card number along with the new expiration. Also, when you click Save from the FrontStream window, they will run a transaction to authorize the credit card. This just sets up the card on their end and confirms that as of today, the credit card is valid and can be used for transactions. The transaction amount will show temporarily on the donor's bank record, but will disappear quickly. This is the same process used by gas stations and stores, so your donors should know what to expect if they happen to inspect their bank account before the authorization charge is gone. We also have a credit card history field section that will show you the activity on the credit card. The two fields at the bottom, credit card number to be converted and credit card expiration to be converted, won't appear in your company unless Synergy is converting credit cards from a previous merchant account. Now you need to set up the day of the month and the next transaction date. The day of the month is the day that you and the donor have agreed on when you will transact their credit card or EFT. These two fields work with both credit cards and EFTs. So if the donor wants the transaction to take place on the 10th of each month, you will put the number 10 in that field. The next transaction date is the date that the next transaction will take place. So if this is October 1st, you might set the next transaction date for October 10th. The next transaction date field is an important field because it gives you control over when the transaction will take place. If the donor contacts you and asks you to skip next month's credit card transaction, you can change the schedule to adjust how Denari calculates the stats, but you will also need to change the next transaction date so that it transacts 1 month ahead. Or let's say that the credit card runs on the 10th and fails. You may contact the donor to get updated credit card information, and now you can move the next transaction date ahead by 2 days so that it runs again for that month's payment. The transaction will only run on the date that is in this field. Everything about setting up EFTs is the same as with the credit card except for the time that it takes to transact. If you have a credit card pledge with the next transaction date of June 10th, then Denari will send the info to FrontStream on the 10th and the transaction will take place on the 10th. EFTs are different, however, because they have to run through the banking system. We've been told that it can take as long as 10 days for EFTs to completely process and for the money to be transferred to your account. However, usually it only takes 2 or 3 days. If your EFT pledge is set to transact on June 10th, Denari will send the info to FrontStream on the 9th. This starts the process so that the actual transfer of money from your donor's account will take place close to the date that they intended. Both EFTs and credit cards, Denari will automatically create a batch for you with all the gift records at the same time, and it sends the info to FrontStream. We'll cover this process in more detail in the credit card and EFT training video. This covers the process of setting up a pledge internally. If you're using Online Community, Denari will create the pledge for you when an online donor chooses a pledge frequency other than one time. It will set up the pledge with the day of the month and next transaction date and will run automatically on those days. Denari will also then update the next transaction date to the next month or next period, frequency period, once those transactions are complete. There are several ways to report on pledge activity, with Pledge Segmenter being the primary method. We've covered Pledge Segmenter in a separate video. Denari also gives you the ability to send pledge statements to update your donors on their pledge status, and those can be filtered to send to everyone or just those who are behind, or even those who are more than a set number of days behind. Statements and reports will be covered in a separate video as well. This concludes the pledge setup video. If you have any questions, please contact tech support through the support button at the top of the Denari page.